Good afternoon. This is the LaRouche Show, the weekly presentation every Saturday afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Today is the December 20th edition of the show, and I'm your host, Harley Schlanger, one of the spokesmen for Lyndon LaRouche. The LaRouche Show is on every every Saturday, so tell your friends and get them to tune in and listen to the archives so they can catch up with what the LaRouche movement is doing. Now, we have a very special show today, and we have a special guest here who I'll get to in just a moment. I just want to make clear to all the listeners that the campaign is in the hot phase, the campaign with Lyndon LaRouche for president, and the first primary is just around the corner on January 13th. Lyndon LaRouche is on the ballot in the Democratic primary there, and the LaRouche Youth Movement is on the march. In fact, we'll be finalizing the plans in the next days for a half-hour TV spot, a spot which will include Lyndon LaRouche from his recent webcast, and he'll be talking about the most important themes of the campaign, the need to remove Dick Cheney, who, by the way, is in trouble and is now acknowledging that he's in trouble. He told the Washington Post the other day, "It drives me nuts when people criticize me." And, of course, among the people who are driving him nuts, in fact, the most important person who's driving him nuts is Lyndon LaRouche, who is talking quite openly and directly about Cheney's role in promoting the lies that led to the Gulf War, the war against Iraq, the lies about weapons of mass destruction, the lies about a September 11th connection to Saddam. But also Cheney is in big trouble because of the scandals coming out around his former firm, Halliburton. And so we'll be discussing this over the next couple of weeks, but just mark down the January 13th date because you can volunteer to help, you can contribute, you can do whatever you can to make sure that we shock the world on that day. So if you would like to know more about the primary and about the LaRouche campaign, you can call us at 888-347-3258. Now, I'm sure we'll be discussing some of these issues during the course of the day, but our topic and our focus is going to be on the question of classical drama and how you move a population that otherwise is subjected to nonstop bombardment of propaganda between CNN and the Fox TV, the MTV, the modern Hollywood, and so on. It's very hard for people to actually have time to sit back and reflect and realize that they are living in contemporary history. Now, our special guest today is someone who has just taken on a project, and I might say performed it brilliantly, a way of demonstrating the relevance of classical drama and tragedy, how you can change a population through presenting a play which gives a real understanding of the actual history of its time. I'm talking about Robert Beltran, who is familiar to many of our listeners. He's an actor, a director, and now a producer. He recently put on a performance, and I would say a brilliant performance, of The Big Knife, a 1948 play by Clifford Odets, which we'll be talking to him about. Robert is probably best known for his role on Star Trek Voyager, for which he was exiled for 7 years on the Voyager. But he's a classical actor, one who has classical training, but whose actual passion and love is for the way in which classical drama can affect an audience and change them. So, Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Now, the first question that struck me when we've been talking for quite a while about your desire to get back into theater, and I was hoping you'd do Othello. Several years ago, you directed and starred in a production of Hamlet out here in Los Angeles. So I was a little disappointed at first when I heard you were going to be doing a play, The Big Knife, which I was not familiar with, by a playwright of whom I had some vague familiarity. How did you happen to choose The Big Knife as your project?
Well, it was really a choice between Othello and something else. and because I had pretty much made up my mind that I was going to do Othello. However, it had been a few years since I'd been on stage, and I thought maybe I should do something prior to tackling Othello, which is a monstrous role in a monstrous play to perform and to put up as a total production. So I was looking around for other things to possibly do when I remembered The Big Knife, which is a play that I had always loved and first read in college. And in rereading it, the relevance and the timeliness of where we are in our country today, paralleling what Odets was writing about in 1948, just seemed so glaringly obvious and necessary, probably because I saw the metaphor more clearly, the larger metaphor more clearly in The Big Knife, and I was still searching for it, and am still searching for that huge metaphor for Othello. So the play was clear. The play was clear in my mind. The Big Knife I'm talking about was clear as to what I could do with it and what I wanted to say with it.
Now, when you say the relevance and timeliness, what was it about the Odets play, The Big Knife, that you saw as relevant and timely for the present audience?
Well, it goes back to what I had been listening and absorbing in Lynn's various speeches about classical drama and classical the relevance and way to approach classical drama. I was hoping that I could find a way to demonstrate that, because I believe wholeheartedly in everything that Lynn has said about that.
And Lynn has written quite a bit about in a sense, the backdrop to the play. I mean, perhaps in a moment you can tell people a little bit about the play, but what struck me the first time I read it, and then when we first started talking about it, is that it leaps off the pages. He's writing about what Lynn calls Trumanism, the post-World War II destruction of the optimism that came out of the victory over the Nazi Germany, the sense of optimism about getting out of the Depression, which was associated with Franklin Roosevelt. And then immediately, Harry Truman, with the death of Roosevelt, Truman became president, and there was a complete transformation. So I assume that was something that leaped off the pages to you as well.
Yeah, it did. It is not stated explicitly in the play that this is a reaction to Trumanism, but it is quite clear that it's a reaction to the way the country shifted after the great buildup and optimism before the war and during the war, the Roosevelt policies going into effect, and the great optimism that caused in the population, and then the complete turnaround, the opposite direction that the country went into, the paradigm shift, as Lynn describes it. That's exactly what Odets was writing about. The fact that Charlie Castle, who was the protagonist in the play,
and that's the character that you played.
Yes. Saw very clearly what was happening to him and what was happening to the rest of the country, but couldn't find a way out, couldn't find the way to deal with it. In fact, the whole play is about, if you want to think of Charlie Castle as the metaphor for the country itself, America itself, you saw the corrupting elements that were slowly killing him.
Now, just so people know a little bit about this, and I would actually recommend that if people can find it, because it's not that easy to find this play. It's not in most of the Odets anthologies. But the play is called The Big Knife. It was written in 1948, and it's about a character, Charlie Castle, who's a very well-known and famous actor who is, in a sense, an indentured servant to Hoff Industries, Marcus Hoff, the studio chief. And in this sense, when you say he's a metaphor for the society, how does this unfold in the play?
Well, if you think of Charlie Castle, when you read the play, if you think of Charlie Castle as the United States, in that he is fabulously wealthy, has virtually anything that he needs at his disposal, and yet he's profoundly unhappy. The very core of his soul is sick, and he knows why, and yet he's juggling so many people are living off of him and making the golden goose lay his eggs, and as long as the golden goose is laying those golden eggs, everybody is happy except for him. So everybody's living off of this man and feeding off of him, and they're not at all concerned with the fact that he's slowly dying, and they are contributing to his death.
Now, the scene is set right at the beginning when he's talking to a gossip columnist who's trying to get a story from typical gossip columnists, trying to find out what's happening with his marriage. But it's really a telling thing, because you're less than 2 minutes into the play, and she says to him, "The first time we met, all you'd talk about was FDR." And he replied, "I believed in FDR."
Right. I think she's referring to when he first came to Hollywood, the idealistic stage actor who came with all these ideas about how he was going to carry on his ideals into the movie industry and make movies that meant something and that said something.
Is this, and you would say this is autobiographical for Odets?
It's autobiographical of Odets and possibly me, but yes, of Odets definitely. Also, Odets was very good friends with John Garfield, and I think a lot of the story was drawn from John Garfield's personal experiences with Warner Brothers, with Jack Warner. But yeah, so we understand that Charlie Castle came to Hollywood as a different person. He's become something opposite, exactly opposite to what he came, how he first came to Hollywood, which was full of idealism, full of the political enlightenment of the Roosevelt policies and what Roosevelt stood for and was trying to implement in the country. These were things that he believed in.
And there's even a shadow at the very beginning, again, in an elliptical way, what Lyndon LaRouche said in the discussions we had with him, almost out of the corner of your eye, the Trumanism, when he's asked by the gossip columnist about his wife's contributions to political parties.
Right. It's a veiled threat in that she's trying to get gossip about his failing marriage, the impending divorce, and he's reluctant to give her that information. She threatens him with possibly revealing her affiliation with a reprehensible political organization, possibly communism, or I think that's what's implied in the play, is that she gave some money to a communist group.
And it's interesting that the play is written just about at the time of the Hollywood 10, with the beginnings of the Red Hunts out here on the West Coast. Let me just remind you, you're listening to the LaRouche Show. I'm your host, Harley Schlanger. Today we're talking with actor, producer, director Robert Beltran. If you want to ask questions, you can send emails to us at radio@LaRouchePub.com. That's radio at LaRouchePub.com. And we'll try to take some of your questions in the second half of the show. Also, we have two panelists who are members of the LaRouche Youth Movement who we'll bring on in a bit, but they're also students of Robert Beltran and the work he's been doing with the LaRouche Youth Movement and the Schiller Institute. So we'll hear shortly from Vicky Overing and Freddy Coronel. Now, on this question then, to get to this, in a sense, we're titling this show today, Trumanism and Tragedy. What is the tragedy then? What do you see that is the trap, and how does this fit the description of classical tragedy in that it mirrors the whole society? Because after all, we're talking about a rich, handsome, powerful movie actor. So how does that have an effect on the audience, most of whom are not handsome, rich movie actors?
Well, I think what the audience is meant to see is how Charlie Castle is trying to save himself, and he is still trying to rise above the mediocrity of and the mercenary qualities of all the people that are around him. For instance, he tries to have a meaningful discussion with his agent, and his agent says, "Charlie, your wife, two beautiful humans, and you can't settle one little problem, your marriage." And Charlie says, well, maybe that's why empires are falling, Nat, because just like me, millions can't settle one little problem. And Nat says, his agent says, who's got time to worry about empires? I just want to live in peace and please my clients. And Charlie says, how do we know that America isn't dying of trying to please its clients? Did you ever think of that? And he says, no, I never did, actually. And Charlie says, don't you feel it in the air? Don't you see them pushing man off the earth and putting the customer in his place? And his agent says, that's a very intelligent remark. By the way, getting back to this contract. So nobody wants to, this is a man who's dying to live a life that is consistent with his ideals. But nobody is interested. The bottom line for everybody is, how much money can you make for me? How can we keep the status quo? You are a commodity. We don't want the commodity too much because the commodity might see just how miserable he really is, and that's what Charlie is beginning to see.
Now, there's an interesting problem that comes up for the audience because Charlie's wife appears to be relatively sympathetic. The person who's the noble sufferer. And it was interesting for people that I know who went to see it. They were somewhat confused by the character of the wife. Now, how did you see the character of Marion, and how does this fit in with this question of the draining of any remaining morality? Because he does say that she represented his idealism. So how did you see that?
Well, the wonderful thing about this play is that everybody is deeply flawed. I mean, everybody is sick in some way or dealing with a huge problem at their very core. The wife was complicit in the play hinges on an accident that happened before the play starts. The event is that Charlie Castle was drunk with a woman in his car, a woman he was having an affair with, and he accidentally ran over a young child and killed the child in his automobile, and then had his best friend take the rap for him and go to jail for him. And this is the great secret and the great blackmailing event that the studio has over him, which is why he's basically a blackmailed, indentured servant. But the wife was complicit in that. She didn't fight that plan to send his friend to jail in place of Charlie. But she has come to the conclusion that they cannot live this way anymore, and she begs him to leave Hollywood, to not sign the new contract that Hoff is threatening, blackmailing Charlie to sign to keep him there in Hollywood for 14 more years. She's threatening to leave him, and she says, just leave it all. We'll go back to New York. You can go back and do theater, and we'll live a relatively fine life. You can make a nice living in the theater still. But she is not so angelic. I mean, he calls her angel all the time, and I think it's kind of ironic because at one point in the play, after he's decided that he's got to sign the contract and and commit himself to 14 more years in Hollywood, she decides to kill the young baby that she's pregnant at the beginning of the play, and she decides to have an abortion because he's decided to stay in Hollywood for 14 more years.
And she doesn't even tell him.
She doesn't tell him. She doesn't discuss it with him. She just does it on her own.
And he doesn't even know that she's pregnant.
That's right. So all of these people are deeply flawed, and I think they're meant to be not in any kind of simplistic way, but I think they are meant to be indications of the society that at large, the general society, American society at the time, all of them, the agent, the wife, the best friend, the journalist, the studio head, the studio head's right-hand man, all of these people are a microcosm of the society as a whole.
Well, then here's the question that many people have about tragedy, because some of the people here, some of the LaRouche Youth members who first saw it said, well, it was depressing, it wasn't uplifting. And the purpose of tragedy is to actually change the audience, force the audience to rethink their own assumptions. How does that work in this play and in tragedy in general? What's your thought on that?
Well, yes, I don't think, when you go to Hamlet, you go out ready to have a party, It's meant to stimulate and provoke thought and thinking about what actually happened on stage and what is the playwright trying to convey. And so when you have these events that happen in the play, this onslaught of terrible events, one after the other, and that finally ends in suicide, I think it's meant to provoke the audience into thinking, how could he have saved himself? What could have possibly happened to change the course of events, and what were really the causes? What really caused this suicide? And that's where the classical principle takes its effect, making people think about how things could have changed, how the outcomes could have changed, what happened, why did these events happen, and how they relate to people individually and to our society as a whole.
And I think
that's the classical principle. The classical principle is not that everybody comes away happy, but the classical principle is that everybody comes out thinking, which is a validation of ourselves as human beings, as opposed to the animals that go to a rave or a hip hop concert and just dance away in some kind of flagellant hysteria. The classical principle is that you go and you sit and you absorb and you absorb the events of the play and you think about it afterwards.
Now, in the discussion that you and I had with Lyndon LaRouche before the play first opened, one of the things that you talked about with Lynn was the importance for you of reading the Journal of Odets in 1940. What did you get from that?
Well, Lynn said it beautifully. He said, you're getting into the mind of the creator, of the creator of the play, the playwright. And he was exactly right, because in studying the Journal of Odets, you really got to read what he was concerned about. And so the play takes on special significance, because what you understand is that the play came from these deep questions that he was asking himself about the nature of our country. Where are we going? He was deeply concerned. And the journal takes place in 1940. He wrote it for 1 year, and the prescience that he showed in the journal was that that he saw clearly what was happening even before the war. He saw clearly what was happening to our society, and 8 years later, it came to fruition in this play. And I think even he was able to see it clearly because he had 8 years to watch what he had seen developing in the country. As he saw it, he had 8 years to see it come to fruition, and that's exactly what he wrote in the play. All of those ideas and things, events that were happening before the war, during the war, and after the war, is exactly what he wrote about in the play.
And there's an interesting sub-theme here on this question of popular opinion, consumption, people who are looking out for their own pleasures, which we associate more often than not with the baby boom generation. But clearly, this is one of the points about the corruption in the World War II generation. How does that come through?
Well, that's one of the great things about the discovery of this play. It's almost as if Clifford Odets had gone to a national Schiller, one of the biannual conferences, and listened to Lynn, and then decided to write a play because it's really hard to hear myself.
Yeah.
But
comes through in the play.
What I had always caught from Lynn was the importance of that paradigm shift that happened after the war, the beginning of Trumanism. Although I had no, and I think that's the problem with a lot of people. You have LaRouche talking about something and go, well, how can I validate this? How can I verify that this is what exactly happened? Exactly what happened. And this play is one of those tools that you have to see. And this is one of the things that Lynn said to me when we were having our discussion together, that he was not the only one to see this. And Clifford Odets clearly saw what was going on. But this play is one of those fossils that you find in an archaeological dig that validates what Lynn has been saying about that paradigm shift that happened. The rampant corruption that happened to that generation and has been developing to the present day. And that's exactly why the play is so relevant now, because it's based on a truthful current of thought and ideas that have taken hold of our society, and Odets saw it clearly. And so this play, I think, is like, a valuable fossil that is a piece of the puzzle that helps us to see the grander, the bigger puzzle.
Well, in a sense, the way Lynn put it to me in a discussion is that from this slice of what is American royalty, Hollywood, you can see the corruption that in fact was in your own family, in your own generation, for the baby boomers to see it, and all the talk from Brokaw and others about the greatest generation. And it's true, the sacrifices and everything else from the Depression to the post-war, and yet you also see the acceptance after the war of mediocrity in the mass media. And we'll come back to this in a second. We have to do a quick station break here. You're listening to the LaRouche Show, which is every Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. The show today and every Saturday is archived on the website of Lyndon LaRouche's campaign and also LaRouchePub.com. So you can listen to this. You can get your friends to hear it. This is, as I said, a weekly show. If you want to find out more about the campaign, more about the the topic of today's discussion and more about the writings and ideas of LaRouche on drama, tragedy, as well as the way to break out of the tragedy, you can give us a call at 888-347-3258. That's 888-EIR-3258. And if you'd like to send an email, a question into Robert, you can do it at radio@larouchepub.com. That's radio@LaRouchepub.com. Now, we're interviewing today Robert Beltran, actor, director, social critic, and teacher, I might add. And I'd like to introduce our LaRouche Youth Movement panel. And before I do, I just want to tell them, please don't move around too much. I think it's one of the phones up in the non-studio phones that's causing some of the static. But we do have with us Vicky and Freddy Coronel, two members of the LaRouche Youth Movement who are very heavily engaged right now in the 2004 presidential campaign, but they're taking a few minutes to join us today. Both of them are in the drama class that Robert does here at our office on a regular basis. So Freddy and Vicky, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hello.
Do either of you have a question for Robert?
Yeah. I was just wondering, what was the process or the development process or change that you saw in the characters that worked with you in the play, and if they actually had obviously had a huge impact on them. What was their response to it?
Are you talking about the actors?
Yeah.
My fellow cast members?
Yeah.
The cast was very, very united in the purpose of the play, and I think one of the things that helped was Harley coming very early to one of our rehearsals and discussing Trumanism. It was a wonderful discussion that we had with the entire cast for about 2 or 3 hours, and what it did was sort of open up the society of American society, post-war society, and it made clear what Odets was really saying. And so once the actors are all on the same page of what we are trying to say and what the playwright is trying to say, then it makes the message clearer. It makes the goal of the entire production that much clearer, and everybody working towards the same goal.
Well, I think also, and Vicky, I know the question that you're asking is one that you as a budding young actress is also experiencing as you're getting deeper and deeper into the Julius Caesar play that we're doing with Robert. But I had a chance to meet and talk with some of the actors, and there really was a change throughout the period of the almost 3 months that you were working with them, to the point that I remember one of the last discussions we had with someone, the first thing he said is, before we go in to talk, let me check to see if I'm still wired, in a reference, a not-so-vague reference, a subtle reference to John Ashcroft. But I think also, Robert, this is a tribute to you, because it was your vision in bringing to life the idea of classical tragedy, which had the impact. Huh?
Well, definitely, Harley. I've been studying LaRouche for a good 2.5 years now, and I've been really chomping at the bit to implement those things that I have learned and believe in as far as how to present classical principles on stage. So this play gave me that opportunity because, like I said, it's almost as though Odets had gone and listened to one of Lynn's speeches. So it was a great way for me to try to demonstrate the classical principle in drama.
Well, I think you did it brilliantly. I'm not a critic, so to speak, but I saw the play several times. I saw it from the beginning, and I think it performed that function brilliantly. Now, interestingly, in discussing this question of, by the way, we do have a question from the conference call. Someone wants to know where they can get a copy of the play. Do you know where they can find it?
Well, you can always go to Samuel French, or you can try to get in touch with the Dramatist's Play Service, who is the publisher of the play. But you can always find it at a library. You know, it's not one of his most produced plays, but it's usually around. You can find it in the library. So I would say if you can't find it at one of the big bookstores around, then you can probably get it at the library.
Robert, what I was going to say is that the interesting thing is the tragedy which became Odets' life after this play, because Odets was one of the people who got caught up in the web of McCarthyism, which is Trumanism extended through Senator Joseph McCarthy. His name was presented to the infamous HUAC, the House Un-American Affairs Committee, and then he himself went before the committee and testified and gave some names. I think this makes very clear what Lyndon LaRouche has been saying on this, that the tragedy is out of a whole generation, even the best people, even someone who was conscious of this process, himself under the relentless pressure of the let's get on with society, let's not try to improve things, let's be practical, let's be like Cocker Spaniels, paws up saying, like me, as Odets says in the play. Unfortunately, most of the generation went through that corruption.
Yeah, I as I said, Harley, that was always a theory in my head, listening to Lynn's speeches and him emphasizing this over and over. It became clear to me when I started working on the play and reading Odets' journal, because Odets in the journal quotes and has writes of extended conversations that he had with other luminaries of the time, people like Steinbeck and F. Scott Fitzgerald and so many people that were around Hollywood and New York at the time in those circles. So a lot of people were discussing these things, and a lot of ideas were being tossed around. Odets was prescient enough to see all of this happening and was able to distill it into the thoughts that he presents in this play.
But unfortunately not strong enough to resist being a victim of the same corruption.
Yeah. Well, he in the play, Charlie Castle always sees himself as half a man, and that is directly from the journals. Odets says he's got to become a whole man, that he's only half a man.
You know, on that topic, we have an email here. It's unfortunately we don't have the name of the person, but they ask you, can you elaborate on what it means to you when Hank Teagle, who is Charlie's, maybe one of his few friends in the play, tells Charlie, you still know that failure is the best of American life?
Well, to me it meant that even if Charlie were to leave everything, and in public opinion would clearly see him as a loser, as someone who failed, someone who was taken from his lofty perch and thrown down into the mud. But yet it's that acceptance, it's that willingness to fail. It's the failure is the best in American life is the person who may not necessarily reach his goal, but has at least striven to get there, that strives to get there with a clear conscience and a clear idea of what he would like to accomplish, and that I think is really true of what's the best American life.
So in a sense, the fact that Odets, though he himself never achieved the bright promise that he may have had in the 30s, his play left with us an ability for us to reflect on that so that we can improve.
Yeah.
So in a sense, what Lyndon LaRouche talks about in the simultaneity of eternity, Odets' words came to life through that presentation, of the play, the production of the play, which now is living in the minds of everyone who saw it.
Well, look at some of the people that probably we would classify as failures. You know, is John Kennedy a failure? Was Roosevelt ultimately a failure because the society turned right around as soon as he died? You know, who's a failure, and how do you define failing? What is failure? It's surely Odets meant it to be the person who strives and may not ultimately achieve what he was hoping for, but it's the example of that person striving that remains behind and is the best of American life.
And then that's the interesting irony at the end, where Hank Teagle, who was called during the play by Charlie Horatio, he actually performs the same role that Horatio performed in Hamlet.
Right. He says, you know, when Charlie dies, kills himself, and Hoff's right-hand man says that he's going to spin the story and call it a heart attack, and that Hoff was there at his bedside. His good friend and associate Hoff was there. His doctor, his little son, his wife. It was a nice little death that Charlie had with just a heart attack. He's going to completely whitewash the fact that Charlie committed suicide. He cut himself in 3 places. Hank Teagle says, no, that's not going to happen. I'm going to tell the truth. He killed himself because that was the only way he could live. You don't recognize an act of faith when you see it. And that's exactly what Horatio does in Hamlet.
Well, let's turn to Freddy Coronel now, and I have a couple more emails we'll get to in a moment. And you can keep sending the emails if you'd like to radio@LaRouchePub.com. So, Freddy.
Hold on one second. Yes?
Yes. Just don't move. Just speak into the phone.
Okay.
It might be your phone that's the problem.
It is.
All right. Go ahead, Freddy.
Well, one question on the when seeing the play, Charlie Castle, your character, it seemed like just throughout the development of the whole entire play, it had like 2 personalities. From one standpoint, it was holding on to that which was moral, and then from the other, it was like you can see more and more of giving into the whole Hollywood scene and just the whole paradigm shift that was taking place. But I know there were certain points in the play where, you know, I remember a particular one where you were drunk, just sloshed, and even though in that state you were telling this one woman who was just a whore, you're telling her, you know, no, I'm not like you, I'm different, and it kind of seemed like you were just like fighting. And so in acting, just having the audience being able to recognize that fight within that one personality, well, within that one actor that's presenting these 2 personalities, and just the difficulty in doing that, and the challenge of just performing the same play every, I mean, like, how many times, like maybe 4 nights a week you played it for?
5 nights.
5 nights a week for how many months?
Oh, it was 5 weeks.
All right. And, yeah, just the challenge in being able to do that just every day, just keep it new for people. You yourselves as actors being able to keep reliving, I would assume, something new so that it can stay new, can stay fresh. So that's, yeah, I'd like to have some discussion on that.
Yeah, I think that question comes up a lot in our drama classes. How do you keep something fresh after having rehearsed it for so many weeks and performing it night after night? And really the only thing that keeps it fresh is to know it better and better and better, so that you're always investigating and trying to broaden and deepen it, give it more breadth, give it more depth. That's how you find the spontaneity in it, because in a great play, and I think this qualifies as a great American play. Calling it a great American play is a qualifier in itself, but within the context of American literature, it certainly is one of our great plays. You find the little nuggets that are there. The more you keep searching, the more you really try to find the crux of each scene, and the crux, the relationships of the characters, and that's how you keep it fresh. And also the fact that you believe in the play, you have you respect the playwright, you respect what his intention was, and you give yourself over to the intention. So
you approach this as a mission, with a mission orientation then?
Yeah, definitely. For me it was. The reason why I did this play, besides the fact that I love it and it's a wonderful play, it has the capability to wake people up. It has the capability to provoke thought and possibly touch one or two or maybe more people in the audience and make them think, you know, that's exactly what's happening today, and that's why we cannot allow this to go on.
Well, in that light, we have an interesting email question for you, Robert, or anyone else on the panel, from Matt in Wichita, Kansas, who said, I'd like to hear anyone in the panel's feedback regarding the situation in Iraq and the issue of tragedy and what it can teach us, especially in light of the current triumphalist feelings in the United States after Saddam Hussein's capture. You want to comment on that, Robert?
Well, what if Paul Bremer all of a sudden decides to walk into his bathroom and sees his razor there? He's going to shave, and then all of a sudden he has a catharsis, and the catharsis is he cannot continue this sham and decides to commit suicide. Or what if he walks into his bathroom, sees his razor there when he's going to shave, and he looks into his mirror and he says, I cannot continue this sham, I'm leaving, and I'm going to do everything I can to stop the occupation in Iraq. Paul Bremer has that choice. Paul Bremer can, you know, if he came to see the play, he would see himself in the person of Charlie Castle.
You think you could even reach Bremer, huh?
Yes, whether those people admit it to themselves or not.
Did you leave a ticket for Cheney at the door?
Well, that's what I mean. I mean, people came to see the play, and I think that Odets was hoping that people would see themselves in Charlie Castle, and even on a larger scale, they would see their country in the person of Charlie Castle.
Freddy, I'm going to ask you to hit pound or star 6 so you can mute your phone. We think that's where we're getting some of the echo from. And then what I'd like to do is go to the conference question from Angela, who would like to ask you a question. So can we get the conference line?
Hi, Robert. This is Angela from LaRouche's campaign office in Virginia.
Hi.
I'm presently reading a newly released biography of Arthur Miller, who, as you know, wrote tragedies in the same period as Odets, the most well-known Death of a Salesman. And Miller has referred to Death of a Salesman as a classical tragedy, has compared it to King Lear. But he's been criticized because people have said, well, you know, Willie Loman, he wasn't, you know, a king, or he wasn't a JFK or an FDR or even a Charlie Castle, so he didn't fall from any great height. And I'm curious what you think about, you know, the tragedy of the common man, and if you think that Death of a Salesman was a classical tragedy.
Yes, I think so. I think it's so simplistic to think that tragedy can only happen to kings and queens. If you think of the sovereignty of each individual human mind, we're all equal, and we all have the capacity to fall from a great height. I mean, anytime a human being contemplates taking his life, to exit this life and this gift that we have of being alive and being able to accomplish things for our fellow man, once you start actually considering exiting by your own hand the world that you live in, that's tragic. That's a subject for tragedy. So, you know, I think that if you cannot read a play like Death of a Salesman or The Big Knife or The Crucible and see a larger metaphor, then you're missing a crucial element, and that is the element of the larger metaphor. And I think great playwrights like Miller and O'Neill and Odets, even though they didn't always achieve greatness, in certain plays they did. And they achieved the status of a tragedy.
We have about 9 minutes left today on the LaRouche Show. We're interviewing Robert Beltran, who just finished a run of the Clifford Odets play, The Big Knife. Now, to follow up Angela's question then, do you think, as someone who's acted in Hollywood, you've done a number of movies, you've been on television, besides Star Trek, you've done quite a bit of other television, do you think the current mass media has destroyed the potential for someone to write tragedy today, or do you think it's possible that we could still have great writers of tragic drama that live contemporaneous with Hollywood and networks and cable?
Well, I think that what has to happen is that, I mean, the society is what produces individuals, and the ideas that prevail in the society are what creates individuals. Yeah, I think so. I think maybe there might be a budding playwright or two in the LaRouche organization. I hope so. I think that should be encouraged. But the mass media is a money-making machine. It's totally at the mercy of making money, and the bottom line is how much money can you make. And that's one of the wonderful lines that Charlie Castle has, one of the great revelations that he has, as he says, talking about the studios and the whole movie industry, he says, "Why am I surprised at them? Isn't every human being a mechanism to them? Don't they slowly, inch by inch, murder everyone they use? Don't they murder the highest dreams and hopes of a whole great nation with the movies they make? This whole movie thing is a murder of the people, only we hit them on the head, under the hair. Nobody sees the marks." And that's what we're fighting. The media has such a grip on our society that we really have to nurture those people that have that can see through it, see beyond it, and rise above it, and nurture them into helping them create and go beyond creating or prolonging all of this mediocrity in pop culture, and try to nurture them into creating something greater and more worthy, closer to the classical principle.
To ask a question about the work you're doing with the teaching and working with younger people, you see the same kind of problem when you see the way people speak, and also, just as important, the way people listen, or rather don't listen. How do you deal with that, the domination of this kind of media culture with the uptalk and everything else, to get people to start reciting Shakespeare so that the actual classical intention and the beauty of the language comes through?
Well, it really boils down to listening and hearing. How acute is your hearing? And you can develop that. So my struggle with the students is trying to get them to hear acutely and to develop that.
Now, when you say by acutely, you're basically talking hearing with their inner ear.
Yes, yes. You're hearing intention, and you're giving back intention. And going back to Freddy's question about keeping it fresh, as long as you're continuing to study the scene and try to find things, once you start finding new things, it's because you're hearing something new. And when you hear something that you hadn't heard before, it stimulates something in you that causes a spontaneous reaction. Even if it's minutely subtle, it registers to the audience. And that's how you keep spontaneity. You keep it by the way you hear it. You keep hearing it freshly. You don't hear it the same every night. And so I'm talking about acutely hearing what you're reading off the page. It starts there. Acutely hearing how you prepare your scenes. I'm always asking the actors to pare down the thoughts to a concrete thought. You're emphasizing too many words. You pare it down to the absolute essential thought. And until you can hear the superfluousness of certain words that are clouding the thought, until you can hear that, you're not quite there. And so that's what I mean. The essential thing is, how are you hearing? How acutely are you hearing?
So in a sense, to use the language of Lyndon LaRouche, acting in drama takes place in the complex domain rather than in the realm of the senses.
Yeah. I mean, last night, Harley, I was auditing a production of King Lear. And it was amazing to me to go through being totally caught up in the play because of the truthfulness of what was happening, and then be taken out of it by certain actors that, for whatever reason, destroyed the illusion. And I was back in this little barn of a theater. I was back looking at the interesting choice of lighting colors that they used, and taken out of the play. And then how I would be sucked back into the play, back into my imagination, when the truthfulness was resumed. So I mean that principle is absolutely essential for everyone to understand, especially the actors that I'm working with. That as long as you're on that line of truth, the audience is with you. When you stop acting as a human being within the context of the play, then the audience is taken completely out of it, and they're thinking about what they're going to eat after the performance.
This hour has gone by so quickly. I had some questions for you on the how you present a historical period. One of the things that struck me very much in seeing the play is that your set really resurrected the late 1940s. Complete with what one of the actors said, the bars serving as a kind of altar around which people engaged in worship. Can you just, we've got a little more than a minute, can just give a little sense that how you presented that. And also I noticed you did the whole play, that the movie that was done leaves out sections.
Yeah. That
was a deliberate decision on your part, I assume.
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't have cut anything from this play. If you were to compare it to a piece of music, I would say it's comparable to, a great symphony by Shostakovich, maybe. Is it a Beethoven symphony? I don't think so. But if you could, in listening to Shostakovich, I know there's rigor there. There's an intention that is there, and this play deserved all the respect. You just don't go ahead and cut stuff from a play like this. It's pretty thoroughly written. There aren't any loose ends.
Well, I've really enjoyed having this opportunity, and I'm sure the listeners have, to discuss The Big Knife, Tragedy, Clifford, Odets with Robert Beltran. We've run out of time. People can join us on the organizers conference call. Thanks for tuning in today. This has been the LaRouche Show, and join us next Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time when we will once again return with the LaRouche Show.
Thank you. Thanks.